Welcome to All Things Chiropractic.
Welcome to another episode of All Things Chiropractic. I'm Paul Andrews.
And I'm Dr. Mark Davini.
Well, if you're listening to us for the first time, we'd love to have you refer back to episode 0. That's just an introduction of who I am and who Dr. Davini is and tools of practice, give you some context. But what are we talking about today, Mark?
Well, today our podcast is to be in insurance or not to be in insurance. That is the question. And we are fortunate to have Paul here, who, along with being my business partner in Tools of Practice, is also a billing company. He is in the trenches with the carriers. He knows all the idiosyncrasies of what to do or not do and how sometimes it seems ridiculous, but you still have to do it anyway.
So before I get into all the wonderful and not so wonderful things I want to say about insurance, because you've been around just a little bit longer than me, Mark, what was it like, in the 80s and early 90s in insurance when it came about?
Well, what's interesting is for the first 3 years in Massachusetts anyway, we didn't have any insurance, so everything was cash. We also hand-developed our x-rays back then, but I digress. So when insurances started to come into play, back then, your accounting system was what's called a one-write system. So you had this pegboard where you would have a day sheet, and then you would put a receipt slip over the day sheet, and you would write, the patient's name and date and all that, and charges. And if the patient wanted a receipt, you would rip, it was a duplex copy, you would rip one and give it to the patient. But they also, when insurance started coming into play, they also had what was called a super bill, which is different than what we call super bills today. It was one of these clip-on types of receipts that you hand wrote, and it had 5 lines in it. So that would be 5 visits that could come in. And it also had a few other boxes where you'd put a diagnosis and the insurance information or whatever. And after the 5th visit, you would take this super bill, you would rip it and take out one of the copies, fold it in half, and put it in a window envelope that was designed for that particular one-write system and sent it off to the insurance company. That was our billing, Paul.
Wow. My life would be a lot easier if that happened.
Well, you wouldn't have your job, but yeah.
Probably not. So to stay on task about, whether or not to be in insurance, let's first just talk about why you would be in insurance or why most of our providers do take some insurance of some kind. And when we talk about being, quote unquote, in insurance, we're talking about you signing a provider contract typically to obligate yourself to that type of insurance carrier and those plans. Or I suppose it could also include billing out a network, which is a little bit different. So we will, talk about the differences there. But first, probably the most common reason why a lot of providers get into provider contracts with insurance carriers is because there's a big expectation that you are in network with most patients, right? They're expecting that you take their insurance and that you're in network. We know that when Affordable Care Act was enacted, and even here in Massachusetts, Romney Care prior to that it mandated that everybody have health insurance.
Where when I began practice, it was the complete opposite. Nobody expected you to be in their insurance because nobody had chiropractic coverage.
Right. And so, today's patient, my perspective on their perception of insurance coverage is it should cover everything I need because I'm spending a lot of money on premiums and copays. Therefore, it should cover everything, right? We know that's not true. We know even if you're in network that isn't necessarily true on all the clinical approaches that you may have. So that's a reason, right? A good reason you want to be in network is that you have a whole patient base that's expecting you to be there. Makes it a lot easier to accept care because there's a third party paying for that, except for the copay, coinsurance, and deductibles, right? Typically,
yeah, made things easy when the reimbursement was worth the effort.
Yeah, and so one of the promises of being in network is that you are now opened up to a whole network or base of patients that have this insurance, right? So you get into these provider directories, they can look you up, things like that, and find you and that you're in network, right? And so looking at that, those all sound very promising, don't they? Very alluring.
Very alluring. And it's why in the early years we pursued it so intensely.
Right. And so, looking at it over the years, I want to digress for a second because I'm a massage therapist. If you don't know that, you haven't listened to episode 0. How dare you not know about me or Dr. Davini? But
he was kind. He just threw that in. He didn't really mean it. So,
yeah. But I look at the massage therapy profession right now, and they're facing choices that chiropractic faced and made, 25, 30 years ago. And what are the choices I'm talking about? Most people don't expect massage to be a covered service, right? Unless you go into a PT or the chiro and you're doing 15 minutes of spot treatment. But you walk in and you get an hour massage. I dare say that most clients do not expect their insurance company to pay for that. Now, some of them may through HSAs, FSAs, maybe they have some type of massage benefit, but typically you're paying for it as the client and then you try to get reimbursed, right? That's if you're talking about coverage.
This was like those early years of no insurance or maybe an occasional insurance.
Yeah. And, as a massage therapist, I fall into the category that I do believe that massage is healthcare. Now, not every massage therapist believes that, approaches massage in that way, cares to even classify themselves as healthcare. And a lot of them are in relaxation and resort areas where I live, a lot of it's that fluff and buff, right? It's I come to get relaxed. I want to just get a nice massage, maybe even deep tissue, whatever.
Couples massage.
Yeah, I don't like doing those. So, but that's the expectation is I'm paying for it out of pocket. But there's a lot of encouragement out there by some the national associations, and I'm not making a judgment if it's good or bad, but just know that these decisions have repercussions. And one of them is that if massage goes in the same direction as chiropractic, where it gets accepted as healthcare universally and it gets accepted as insurance is covering it, that it may not be the best thing for the individual practitioner. And when I have these discussions with individual practitioners, I say, what do you charge for an hour massage? Now, the answer could be $65, $85, $150. It just depends on where you're practicing, what your setting is, and what your skill level is. And I say, well, imagine if you're let's say $100 an hour for a 60 or 55-minute massage. Now imagine instead of getting that $100 at the end of your 50 to 60-minute massage, and they pay you $100 and maybe even a tip, right? Imagine you don't get paid anything besides maybe a $20 copay. Now you have to enter this service into some type of a billing system that you have to pay for. You have to now this billing has to be batched out through a clearinghouse that you have to pay for so it can be submitted electronically. Oh, and by the way, you have to make sure you document the full session and all the SOAP components of it. Oh, and perhaps they need pre-authorization. So before they even came in, you had to stop and get pre-authorization or a referral from a primary portal provider. Oh, and then after you submit all of this, you have to make sure that you have an understanding of coding and modifiers to make sure you submit it correctly. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have to set up electronic funds transfer or ACH to get your electronic deposit. Now, when the money comes in, you have to look at the remittance advice to make sure that what you expected to get paid was what you got paid. Oh, and by the way, that 60-minute 4-unit massage that you got $100 cash for, insurance only allowed $65. The patient paid you $20. So the check from the insurance carrier is $45.
And you have to write off the difference.
Now,
if somebody said that to us back in the 80s, we would sit there and go, why do we want this? And, now fast forward to where we are now, I think of it often and say, what a perfect way to control us. Because we thought we wanted to be in insurance. Now the strategy is put everybody in insurance, and now we get to control what we pay them, which means if we wanted to eliminate a profession, we just don't pay them enough to be in business, which sounds pretty familiar right now.
Right. Exactly. And so in the massage therapy example, lots of clients, like I said, don't expect you to go through that process. They don't expect coverage. But in chiropractic now, that is expected. Most plans will cover chiropractic in some way, shape, or form. But let's look at the situation with being a network, right? So as we said, there are positives to being a network with opening up the patient base and getting more people through the door, and the patients, copay, not all the time now, but sometimes is less than your cash visit or your self-pay visit. I mean, sometimes they're more now, but things we'll talk about. So, do I want to be a network or not, right? When it comes to insurance, am I getting enough for what I'm getting? Am I getting reimbursed enough to make it worth it, right? So we have done some classes on this, some webcasts and other things. So, Mark, in thinking about it with a provider who's asking this question, and they say, well, should I be in insurance or this insurance or not? Where do you take them first? Like, what do you have them do? What questions do you ask them?
Well, to me, it comes down to affordability. So let's talk about it just strictly from a business perspective, because clinically, we know it's important that all people receive the care that they're supposed to get. So let's just put on our business person's hat on for a moment here. So if you know what your per person costs are, for example, I treat so many people a week on an average. I charge this much. I collect this much, blah, blah, blah. There's formulas that we have to figure this all out. And what you come out with is a per person cost. And all of a sudden you look at that per person cost and compare it to what you're actually receiving. Now, there were times where that far exceeded what it cost to treat that patient. Not so much anymore. Like I said, they don't give us raises like they're supposed to. So now the cost of treating that patient may actually be close to, what you receive for treating that patient may be close to the cost of treating that patient. Sometimes it may actually even be less. So now you have to look at that and say, is it to my advantage to be in this network? Because every time I treat a patient, I'm losing money. So you have to look at it from a pure business perspective, because clinically we all know treating is paramount. You have to be able to offer patients the best care. That means you do what you do everything you're supposed to do. And if that means that you're treating it, that it's costing you more to treat this patient than you are receiving, that's a business decision. And so the very first thing that you have to look at is the business decision. The second thing is philosophically. Chiropractic as a wellness program is a square peg in a round hole when compared to medicine. And there are many practitioners now graduating that really approach chiropractic, we'll say allopathically, that they are symptom-based care. They catch and release. They treat them, get rid of the symptoms, come back when you have a problem, which is fine. That's your choice. In one of our other podcasts, we talk about being unique, chiropractic through time. So it's okay, but be clear about what it is you are and what you're doing. If you're a wellness practitioner, you definitely fight that square peg round hole mentality, which means you have to be very clear about what insurance involvement looks like. That means I am going to use your insurance for your active treatment from A to B. But from that point on, it becomes either reconstructive, wellness, or maintenance. That means we have to talk about our cash scenarios. So in this world today, it's more important, again, referring back to our Chiropractic Through Time podcast, to know who you are and what you are. Because if you're a wellness practice and you are trying to get insurance involved in your wellness practice, and you're trying to keep insurance involved during the wellness phases of a patient's care. It's square peg, round hole.
So let's talk about out of network, right? So we talked about in network. What does it mean to be out of network? Well, it certainly means you have not signed a provider contract with that carrier, or you've terminated that contract. And I'll just say this about provider contracts. I would say with a surety that less than 1% of providers actually read these contracts they're signing. Right? They don't
even have them in their physical possession.
Yeah. Well, and now with the digital age, you can electronically sign them. So you might have it in your download folder somewhere in a computer that already broke 5 years ago, and you don't have a copy. Or, and in these provider contracts, there are very specific legalese that you should know what you're getting into. And here's a highlight of one I like to bring out a lot. It's whenever you get into a contract, you have to think about the divorce, right? How do I get out of this thing if I don't like it, if it's not working for me? And there's one contract in particular, and I won't name the carrier because I just don't think it's appropriate to get sued.
Exactly.
Yeah. But this particular termination clause says that if you want to terminate this contract, it will be effective 90 days after notice. However, if there's no other contracted provider of your specialty within a certain geographical area, you cannot get out of contract until such time as another provider in your specialty gets into that geographical area, perpetually leaving you stuck in a contract that you don't want to be in. And if nobody else is in that area, there's probably a good reason for it, and it might not be likely that you actually get out of it anytime soon. Crazy, right? I mean, that is a crazy clause.
In a free country.
Yeah, you got to be careful about this stuff, right? So another thing that we all know when you're in network, right, or should know, is that the carrier is free pretty much at any time with quote unquote written notice to alter their policies within that contract, meaning how are they going to reimburse you, what they expect from you, medically speaking, documentation wise, reimbursement coding modifier wise, fee schedule wise.
Or sometimes they make you join other organizations.
There are times, that you have split contracts. So if you want to be, in their indemnity policy, their HMO policy, and their Medicare Advantage policy, well, you can't be in their Medicare Advantage policy if you're not a par provider with Medicare. So, these things all sort of relate and have influence over each other. I guess the moral of the story here is know what you're getting into, because it's not just about what are they going to pay me. That certainly is a big part of it, the fee schedule. What is the allowable on these particular codes? And then also what is the threshold or standard for the documentation that becomes defendable or not? Because a lot of us, and I'm sure Dr. Davini, you can attest to this, having been in practice for a long time, clawbacks do happen. Clawbacks are when the insurance carrier says, we paid you prospectively, meaning we paid you without asking for notes ahead of time. But now we see that we've done an audit, we've asked for some notes, and you have not met our documentation threshold on certain coding. We've now extrapolated that you failed that documentation audit 50% of the time. We paid you for this code over the last 3 years. We want 50% of our money back. Right? That's an example of a clawback, right?
Absolutely, and it happens more often than we want to admit.
And so as an in-network provider, you're subject to all that wonderfulness because you signed a contract that says you would love to be subject to all that wonderfulness. We are really painting a picture for being out of network, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Is that intentional? I don't know. You tell me. But when you're out of network, now you can manage the patient's care without this third party dictating to you what that care is going to be.
And you have to even be careful when you're out of network. I can't tell you how often it happens, but it happens very often where a doctor will call me up and they'll say something like, I'm not getting paid, or the insurance company stopped paying me on this, or blah, blah, blah. And then I'll start with, well, what's the insurance company and are you in network? Well, no, I'm not in network. I said, but did you accept assignment on that claim? Did you wait for the insurance company to pay you after you billed them? And they go, well, yes, I accepted assignment. I said, and now you're getting what they pay you. What do you do? Do you collect the balance from the patient? No, I just accept what they pay me and write off the difference. I said, so you're walking like a duck, you're sounding like a duck, but you're not a duck. You're acting like you're in network, but you're really an out-of-network provider. So I'm confused why you're out of network. To me, as a practitioner, the advantage of being out of network is that I get to collect my money up front, my full fee, because I'm out of contract. I'm not bound to any fee other than my regular full fee, and I get to decide by choice whether I want to bill the carrier as a courtesy for the patient or just hand the patient a super bill and say, you're on your own. So you have to really understand what it means to be in and out of network. And if you're out of network, to me anyway, it seems like you should behave as if you are out of network.
And I realized that a lot of providers who want to be out of network recognize that the reimbursement can be better depending on the state that you're practicing in. I mean, you're not subject to those contract fee schedules. They process out of network once the patient's deductible's been met, which usually is a lot higher out of network, or, if it's towards the end of a benefit year, their out of pocket may have been met. So their out of pocket, out of network, out of pocket's met. So 100% now. And, that could be a very nice reimbursement. But the mistake a lot of providers make who are out of network is they ask the patient to bring in the reimbursement checks that they receive, and they sign them over to the provider. Now, most out-of-network carriers now, they have opted to not recognize assignment of benefits for an out-of-network claim, ever. So whenever an out-of-network claim comes in, they process and pay the patient directly. Some patients might get really jazzed about getting paid to go to the doctor, right? And maybe you have a hard time getting that money. Or they sign over the checks because it's convenient. But now you're cashing that insurance company's check. So if the insurance company decides, we shouldn't have paid that, who can they come after now? They can come after you because you cashed their check, as opposed to asking the patient to pay for it out of pocket and then letting the patient cash that.
And you're not even in network. And now you've put yourself between the patient and the insurance company. So when something goes wrong, the patient's going to look at you and say, that's your problem. Fix it. All I know is I have insurance and that's your problem. Where if you keep it clean and stay out of network, collect your money up front, and I definitely adhere to billing as a courtesy for the patient, but the patient gets the money, not you. You're getting paid. If you go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, if you figure out your per visit cost, sometimes that extra $5, $10, $20 makes all the difference in the world.
It does. And that advice goes in reverse too. If you're out of network, you don't accept assignment on a claim, and the insurance company decides to send you the check, it would be my personal opinion that you sign that check over to the patient. Let them cash the insurance company's
exactly.
check.
Keep your books clean that way. It comes out to be one of those things where, and you can see this is really a discussion because there is no right and there is no wrong way. We're not saying absolutely you do this or you do that. You have to pick what fits your practice, what fits your area. Maybe there is an insurance that has a particularly good coverage with a higher out-of-network rate than in-network rate, and you find a way to make that work for you. That's all great. But recognize that part of the problem in being in business today is trying to be profitable while still being in insurance. Not the practice of chiropractic. The business of chiropractic is being profitable and involving yourself in insurance.
There's a bit of a harsh reality. I don't know how harsh it is right now, but it's getting there. And that reality is that patient responsibilities climb every year. And when I'm talking about patient responsibilities, or PR for my billing people out there, I'm talking about copays, coinsurances, deductibles. So when somebody's copay is at or exceeds your self-pay rate, you really are becoming a cash practice for those particular patients at some point, right?
And yet you still have to do all the work.
Correct. You're still subject to all the wonderful things that being a network is when you say, well, if I'm charging $70 for a self-pay adjustment and this patient's copay's $75, why am I dealing with their insurance? What is the advantage to me? What's even worse is when your self-pay rate, let's say in this example, is $70, and the allowable for that in-network claim is like $40, and the patient's got a $40 copay. Or even worse, the patient's got a $45 copay, the allowable is $40. Now you've over-collected by $5. And you say, well, I can keep the copay. It depends on the state you're in and the plan. A lot of states, a lot of plans, you can only collect the patient responsibility, or PR, as reflected on the remittance advice.
But when I started insurance, the question was only one. Do you or do you not have chiropractic coverage in your insurance? Because if they said yes, that meant it was 80-20 with a $100 deductible. That was every plan universally across the board. But you're kind of getting the sense now from what Paul is saying, there's no two alike anymore. You have to know so much about so many things and all the idiosyncrasies of each and every carrier that it becomes its own job just by itself, which was fine when you're able to collect enough money to make that worth it. But as the reimbursements don't change and the cost of doing business does change, you might have to rethink this.
And like any insurance with a patient, where does it all start? It starts with verification of benefits. Even that has become challenging. Why? Remember the huge Change Healthcare breach? It's in the news. It was everywhere. It's one, if not the largest breach of data in U.S. history, because it was a breach that went across so many different professions, so many different patients, so many different policies. You know, Change Healthcare it's owned by United Healthcare, and it was the backbone of a lot of electronic claims verifications, even some clearinghouse stuff. It was a lot of business to business support, and when that went down, it stopped claims dead for months. And it continues to have an issue with verification of benefits. We still have major carriers in different states that you cannot verify benefits through the actual carrier's website because the Change Healthcare was the backbone, and they still have yet to resume that. Now you can flee to clearinghouses that have found workarounds, which is great. Sometimes that costs you more money. But if you can't verify benefits, you're flying blind. You're throwing that claim in and you're hoping for the best. Right? And then you got to tell the patient the bad news because you didn't know that, their coverage was limited, or the copay was higher, or it didn't cover x-rays,
and they don't care. They expected their insurance to cover their services.
Right. And then if you overlay what we haven't talked about today, which probably is a whole nother episode, is the No Surprise Billing Act, right?
Oh, God. Again, all these regulations that come out that definitely are not even practical in the small office setting, but yet we have to find a way to make them work. And when it comes to not surprising a patient with their bills, all of a sudden now they have federal regulation that backs them if they want to make a case against you. And truthfully, given a lot of the conversations I've had with people over the years, there will be many more complaints that use the No Surprises Act as a basis for them once patients start to understand this a little bit more. Took a while for people to know that HIPAA existed, but now everybody understands HIPAA and their confidentiality of protected health information. Once they get to know the No Surprises Act, then a lot of our procedures might have to change to ensure that the patients don't feel as if they're paying more than they should.
So it comes back to the topic at hand. Do you stay in insurance contracts or not? Right? It's really
Exactly.
It's up for you to decide. We've given you hopefully some information and food for thought on this.
Yeah.
And,
With that, our closing thought, the grass is not always greener. Do your diligence. Make sure you know what you're getting into and getting out of.
Well, thank you again for another episode of All Things Chiropractic. I'm Paul Andrews.
And I'm Dr. Mark Davini. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to All Things Chiropractic. We'd love to hear from you. Visit allthingschiropractic.com with comments, episode ideas, or questions. Or connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at All Things Chiropractic Podcast. Be sure to join Dr. Mark Davini and Paul Andrews next time for another episode of All Things Chiropractic.